Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. Today I have 10 books that I think are completely binge-worthy and you're not going to be able to put them down once you start. So let's start off with a book that is getting an Apple TV adaptation here very soon, and that is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This book is a scientific thriller with some, I would consider, soft scientific elements. I don't think the science really bogs down the stories at any point. This is as much of a mystery thriller as it is a science fiction book, and I don't think you need to be a huge science fiction fan to enjoy this book. The basic premise of this book is our main character is replaced with a basically identical clone of himself, and he has no idea how. He is transported to a very similar world, and he at first can't really tell the differences, but it quickly unfolds, and then there are some more elements into it that keep the story fresh and going. I will say this is a story you just kind of have to go with and enjoy. I don't think if you look at this with a super critical lens, you will enjoy it as much as I did, but this is a book that I gave 4-star twos and had a great time with it. Next up, I'm going to talk about Project Hail Mary. Now this is a super popular book. I believe it is actually getting made into the movie. This is by Andy Weir, the same guy who wrote The Martian, and that movie is based off of it. Project Hail Mary and The Martian are very similar in some aspects, but there is something that happens in this book that I don't want to mention at all that really elevates this book to another level. If you have the ability to listen to this book on audio, I highly recommend it. I think that is another thing that really enhances this story. The basic premise of this is the sun is going out, and we have a crew sent into space to try to figure out what is going on and if there is a way to fix it, and all kinds of things unfold from there. There's a narrative device in here where our character has amnesia, and so you are kind of slowly learning things at the same time they are, which doesn't always work, but in this case it is absolutely fantastic and really builds the story up as we go through it. Speaking of a book that is elevated by the audiobook performance, I believe Evil Eye by Madhuri Shakur is only available on audio, and this was such a fun book. I listened to this all in one sitting. What really makes this interesting is it is partially told through like voicemails, which I know can sound very interesting, but because of the audio acting in here, it is absolutely fantastic. I'm normally not a fan of audiobooks that add in a lot of extra elements, but the way it works here in Evil Eye is absolutely fantastic. This is just kind of a general fiction story with maybe some fantastical elements to it. It's kind of up for you to decide, but we really are just following the life of our main character and her new love interest. And I know what you're saying, romance? No, this is not really a romance. This is very much us following this character and their journey and just some things that are going on. But like I said, what really elevates this is its audio performance, and it is fantastic. Next up is The Never-Ending End of the World. This was one of my favorite books from last year. I think it was in my top 10, and it takes place in a world where loops are happening. So this is another slight scientific story, but really the scientific elements don't come into play at all until the very end of this book. So once again, I kind of hesitate to call it sci-fi unless you consider dystopian sci-fi exclusively, because this is more of a dystopian book. Now, I mentioned that there are loops in this book, and basically there are some people who are in loops and some people who are not in loops. The people who are in loops do the same thing at the same time constantly. They never stop. And if they're disrupted, bad things happen. Obviously, there are people who are not stuck in these loops, and those are the people we're following. We follow them as they reform society, as they have all kinds of life events, and just in general try to figure out what is going on. And that is another mystery element that is put into this book that is done so well. Obviously, this is a list of binge-worthy books, and I did binge this book very quickly. I needed to know what was going on, and I just felt so connected to the characters that I just wanted to see what was going on with their lives. Not that this is like a Stephen King slice of life book, but you know, there are things happening in their lives that you just feel for. I will say another thing that really keeps this book interesting is there are time jumps through it. So we'll go from a character being like 10 years old to 20, and you don't need all the details that happen in between there. You're really just getting the highlights of things that are happening, and I just think it is very well done. Our next book would fall into the horror category. I read this for Halloween last year, or I guess really October, and that is The Troop by Nick Cutter. This is another one of those stories where you do want to know the mystery that is going on. Not that the mystery is really the main aspect, and the mystery isn't really that important to the overall story that's being told. You are really just told about how a group of Boy Scouts, react to this horrific situation that they are put into. The basic premise of this is you have these Boy Scouts who are on an island doing a Boy Scout retreat, and an unexpected visitor brings something along that absolutely destroys what is going on. There's a little bit of a Lord of the Fly aspect thrown into this story. I will say there is definitely some body horror in here, and so if that is something you're not into, you will not enjoy this book, but for the most part, I think it is very, very well done. It gives you just a little bit of horror, but not in like the ghost scary kind of way, in the trauma of real events in this story. Switching genres yet again, the next book I have is The Fall by Ryan Cahill. This is the prequel novella to his Bound and the Broken series, and it is actually the only piece of writing I have read in that series. But this is a very short novella that is action-packed from start to finish, and you can just sit down and binge through it. It might give you a good taste for the series. I think there is some contention about fans on the order you should read them in. To me, it felt like it made sense to read this first, especially because you can get it for free if you sign up to Ryan Cahill's newsletter. You get a PDF of this, so if you want to check it out, it's free. I do recommend it. I had fun with it. At some point, I will probably continue that series. I don't have like a burning desire to get to it, but this is a very fast-paced fun. If you're just looking for something quick, action-packed with some fun dragons in it, this is definitely going to be something you enjoy. Next up, I have Moonraker by Ian Fleming. This is the third or second James Bond? Yeah, this is the third James Bond book, and I had a great time with the James Bond series. It is not for everybody, I will say that, but I found this book to be incredibly easy to read, fun to read, and enjoyable throughout. There are definitely some dated things that happen in this. This is a book that came out, I think, in the 50s. So there are some of those elements into it that might not be something a lot of people want to read. But if you have never touched a James Bond book, I would recommend Moonraker first. If you want to read another one, I would also say Casino Royale is another great one to read. Next up, I have what I guess would mostly be considered a lit RPG, and that is How to Defeat a Demon King in 10 Easy Steps by Andrew Rowe. And this is a very kind of fun, light-hearted, satirical fantasy where you follow a character who is leveling up their magic to be able to defeat the Demon King. And the one thing I really did enjoy about this book is the magic that they are using is not like your standard cookie cutter, they have a fire blast or electricity. They are using something that is unique, and I think it really gives the author an ability to be creative and explore this world in a way that is different from traditional fantasy, not just from the fact that it's lit RPG, but just in the fact that it is using a non-traditional magic that most people would never even think to use, and just the interesting situations that come out of that are really fun, and this is another short, fast-paced fantasy for you to dig into. Next up, I have a very gritty fantasy story, and that is Hellmouth by Giles Christensen. This is a very brutal book, and it's one that I would love to see made into a movie. If you are into more of a grim, dark aesthetic to your book, this is a book I think you should read. Once again, it is very short, action-packed with a fun element of fantasy in it, and I'm sure you will be able to get through it very quickly. And lastly, we started with Blake Crouch, and we are going to end with Blake Crouch. This was the first Blake Crouch book I read, and that is Run. The general premise here is that these lights appeared in the sky, and it has changed people. People are affected, and we follow a family who is legitimately just on the run, trying to survive. And there are many different elements that I enjoyed about this book. One, just being the mystery of the lights, what happened, why has it made people act the way they are, and then it's just that heart pounding, moving forward, trying to stay safe, get ahead of the trouble that are behind them. It kind of gives off a Walking Dead zombie vibes, except the zombies in this case are still full intact people, but who have nothing but a desire to do harm to you inside of them. And I found that to be incredibly interesting, and it was a book that I read extremely fast and had a great time with. So that is my list of 10 binge-worthy books. Let me know if you plan on picking any of these up. If you have read any of them, let me know your thoughts. Did you think they were binge-worthy? And I think these are all great to break up some of those long fantasy reads. But that's all for me, and as always, have a good one.